So first, anything on the ferries, Juliet?
Mayor, did you identify the million rider? Or did they get like balloons and
I fear we didn't do that, and we should have. So heads will roll, DDC. I don't know if we did. We identify the millionth rider, James Patchett.
We have not yet identified the specific millionth rider, but the Hornblower has kindly offered to offer half-price drafts on board all day. So, in all seriousness,
Just the millionth rider?
no, for all riders on the millionth day.
everybody?
So, yes.
Okay, this should have been the top of my announcement. Could you repeat that, please?
Half-price drafts all day on
All
NYC
NYC
Ferry.
Ferry.
All NYC Ferry.
James, I'm going to teach you something about public relations. Okay. So, we do not know the millionth rider. We're going to make, at the 2 millionth rider, we're going to be smart enough to find the person. But I'm very happy that Hornblower is celebrating in such a generous fashion. You want to add? Okay.
Of the million riders, do you have any estimate as to the number of the percentage of people who are residents of New York City and how many are tourists?
James is going to speak to that because we obviously we're early on in the process, but we have been looking at that. The number one reason we created this, of course, is for people getting to work, getting to school, getting to medical appointments, and that means for everyday New Yorkers. But James will speak to what we know so far from initial survey.
So we ran an initial survey over the last couple of weeks. We don't know every rider, but we do know is that over 80% of riders identified as being New Yorkers, and that survey was conducted both during the day and on the weekend, and the total was slightly over 80% were New Yorkers.
Other questions on the ferry, on the new service, on the millionth rider? Any questions on the ferry? Yes.
Have there been any updates on whether or not this particular network might be expanded to Staten Island?
So it's the same reality we talked about before. Now I will say the speed with which we're surpassing the goals is an important factor in this discussion, because what I've said is before we take next steps, there's obvious interest in Staten Island and other parts of the city of adding additional lines, but I wanted to see how ridership went. So this is a promising sign so far, but my message has been let's get through the build out of this set of lines into the beginning of 2018, and that's the natural time to then decide if we're ready to go the next distance and add additional lines. So there's not a formal update, but the news is encouraging based on what we've seen so far.
And just in terms of, I know the borough president has proposed a privately funded
Yes.
ferry service between St. George and Midtown. Are you going to be assuming any of that happens, are you going to be looking at that in terms of whether it makes sense for the city to jump in? Or do you think your timeline is maybe ahead of that? Or?
Well, no, I think it's different. I think it's a very fair question, but I'd say I think they're running on very different tracks, if you will. The private service discussion is obviously about the development that's occurring on the North Shore. And so there's different realities there about the private sector's role that could be obvious. They're going to benefit. There's been ferry service connected to other private sector dynamics like IKEA and Red Hook and things like that. So that, I would say, needs to be looked at unto itself. There's been some discussion of whether to connect it to New Jersey. That's obviously a whole different discussion. We're going to look at further expansion based on what we have been seeing so far and what we're trying to do, first and foremost, again, for New York City commuters, and then also for weekend use. And there's a number of nominations that have been made from around the city for different lines. So we're going to look at all that from scratch. The effort the borough president is undertaking is a good one, but I think it's a different kind of approach because it connects to the private sector development. We're going to keep working on that on its own track. Would you like to add to that? Yes, do that.
are there still the waits or the lines for the Rockaway ferries? And is there a way to ameliorate that?
Yeah, we have a lot of improvement on that front. This one was one of the things we underestimated, that the demand would be quite so high. So I think I'll start, and James can give you some specific facts, but I'd say we have two realities. The weekday reality, for the different routes running during the weekday, we feel very good about. We've added some backup boats. So in some places where we saw particular crowding at like a particular moment of the rush hour, we have the ability to come in with a backup boat and pick up more folks. But the real challenge has been the Rockaways and then also Governor's Island. And at key times in the morning, key times in the afternoon when people are coming back. So there's been a lot of additional capacity rented, leased to be able to do that. We've substantially reduced the waits. There's still going to be times when people go into the beach or coming from the beach are going to have some waits, but it's much less. And we'll keep making adjustments as we go along. You want to speak to the numbers or the new service?
Sure. So we started. The original plan was to run 2 vessels on the Rockaways, 250-person vessels. And since that time, we've added 2 additional regular service on the weekends. So that's 4 total vessels that are running. So we've doubled capacity. In the last 2 weekends, we were experimenting with running a 500-person vessel. The last 2 weekends, on top of the 450-person vessels, when we were doing that, we were people were not waiting very long at all. We were able to clear all of the lines. So we've had good success the last couple weekends. We're looking to extend that and other options as well to ensure that we're meeting the demand on the weekends.
Yeah.
Can you discuss how you're meeting the demand for these stops, the existing stops on the NYC Ferry? They also have high demand, especially during the rush hour.
Yeah, and that's where we did need to add additional boats to relieve some of that demand because it was particular moments in the rush hour that we found were challenging. So why don't you speak to that?
Hi. So the original vessel route planned 3 vessels along the East River. We had added a 4th vessel just initially to deal with demand issues. And then we were running a 5th vessel, which what we called a sweeper vessel, which was being used to, essentially when we identified people who'd been left behind in the dock, we ran the vessel out there. But over time, what we discovered, to no one's surprise, was that everyone wanted to get to work around 9 a.m., which meant that everyone was showing up at the docks right around, between 8:15 and 8:30. So instead of continuing to just run a vessel that was waiting to show up when people were going to be left behind, we've instead now temporarily added an additional vessel to show up at those docks about 5 minutes after the initial vessel on those key rush hour routes. In the last few mornings, we've been running that very successfully, and that vessel has been successfully able to pick up everyone who came for those first boats. So overall, actually, it's been a very successful new solution to this, and we're going to continue to have to evolve. And obviously, also the demand will change by season. So this is what we're seeing during the summer, but when it comes to October or January, it could be very different.
Okay, last call on ferries.
Will the Metro Card ever be connected to the system?
That is a live issue, meaning I think there would be a lot to be said for that at the appropriate time. There's a lot to work out, what technology and cost and everything else. But that's certainly something we're looking at strongly as we get down the line. I think the simple way to think about this is phase 1 here is to build out the routes that have already been announced through the beginning of 2018. See how that's going, see what we have to make in the way of adjustments, decide if we want to add additional routes. That's the first set of things we have to deal with. We're definitely going to have discussions with the MTA. We've started them very broadly, but we want to get into a detailed discussion about whether we can find a way to connect this to it. Obviously the same with light rail when that comes on board. But I do want to emphasize, it's a good idea, but it's also a complicated idea, and it's something that's going to take some real work to resolve. Yes, Mara? Okay, going ahead. Okay, last call on this. As I said, I have another thing I want to talk about before we go to general questions. Going once on ferries, twice. Okay.